Hi, hellos, my name is Stephen Zhang, and I've created an easy way to change light energy into heat energy while storing that energy. Now I'm doing this by something called a PCM, or phase change material. It's kind of what it sounds like. Essentially, you have an object, and you change its physical state by adding or removing energy. Now I'm also making this project a bit more complex by adding another component called the photothermal effect. It's also what it sounds like. Essentially, you have light energy, or photo, and you convert it into heat energy, or thermal, under photoexcitation. Now I'm combining both the photothermal effect and the PCM by having my object have multiple layers. And an analogy can be drawn with a watermelon. Don't ask me why I chose this, but just roll with me. Now you have the outside layer here, the green part, as the photothermal layer. And what happens is the light from here, the sun in this case, hits that layer and transforms that light energy into heat energy. And then that heat energy is therefore going to melt the inside of the big red juicy part here, the PCM, into a liquid, therefore storing that energy. Now, of course, this won't happen with a watermelon because watermelons aren't exactly PCM, but you get the main idea. Now, as far as practical applications go, I have a bunch of ideas. Since I'm originally from Canada, and since Canada is, the roads are dangerous because of icing there, I was thinking that if you're able to infuse my PCM with pavement, with concrete, with all these other building materials, you would essentially have anti-icing roads. During the day, the roads would basically be able to take in the light, and then they would release that energy as heat during the night, essentially allowing for the ice on the road to melt. Now, another idea I have is, since I live in Texas and it's really bloody damn hot down here, you could have the roofing materials infused with the PCM. Therefore, the heat from the energy would stay up there while allowing for the household rooms to be a lot more cool, making you save money on AC and air conditioning. I said that twice, don't mind me. Anyways, thank you for your time and have a nice day.
In the face of rising environmental pressures, a lot of researchers try to examine different ways to reduce the level of pollutants in the environment. One way that a lot of researchers try to do this is by creating pollutant-consuming microbes. However, this is often inefficient, and what my project aimed to do was to try to streamline this process by looking to see if there was a relationship between different proteins that break down different types of pollutants, in order to see if it would be possible to create a small genetic change that would create one synthetic protein that could break down multiple pollutants. So I did this by using the computer language R, and what that allowed me to do was to begin to analyze the genetic data of various proteins that I researched to be effective in breaking down various kinds of pollutants in various different organisms. So the first part of my program was the core analysis method. The core method from the Bio3D package in R conducts an ellipsoid of variance to determine the degree of genetic variance between various aligned proteins. I created various different groups out of the proteins that I looked at, and from there I could begin to look at the amount of similarity between these different groups of proteins. So the two groups that had the highest amount of cores and the strongest degree of similarity were sets 3 and 11. Set 3 had two proteins from different organisms that break down different compounds in plastics, and set 11 had one protein that breaks down the S-triazines in herbicides and one protein that helps organisms reduce the toxicity of mercury. And so what that signifies is that there's a lot of genetic similarity between the proteins, and potentially enough that you could make a small genetic change that would help one protein to adopt the function of another protein. So the next part of the project was to begin to look at the structural similarities, as so much of the function of protein is based on their structure. So to do that, I used the method, the normal mode analysis method in the Bio3D package. And what that method does is it treats every pair of amino acids in a protein as two ends on a spring to begin to quantify the amount of movement between that and get an idea of how the protein is behaving. The various graphs that were created from that method help to visualize the amount of atomic fluctuation between each point. Most of these graphs aligned with the core analysis in terms of the ones that had the strongest cores also showed peaks and falls in similar ranges. However, this still needs to be further explored as it's just a visual representation. I also want to soon look at the epistatic interaction. These similarities signify that there's potential to possibly create a small genetic change that could result in one synthetic protein that could attack multiple pollutants, whether they be various types of compounds and plastics or very different things like the heavy metals and the herbicides, so that the level of pollutants in the earth can be reduced.
Hi, my name is Siddhant Pachipala from the Woodlands, Texas. Chronic stress, a disorder marked by dangerously prolonged stress levels, is becoming increasingly widespread, and current diagnostic methods are inadequate to address the issue. However, the sole tool to predict chronic stress is the perceived stress scale, which has not yet been approved by clinical boards and consequently is not administered during routine psychological checkups. My project aimed to produce an alternative tool to determine whether an individual was predisposed to developing chronic stress. To create this tool, I sought to recognize correlations between characteristics of an individual's writing and their self-reported stress score. To capture participants' writing, I developed a positive prompt about vacations and a negative prompt about betrayal. I administered these two prompts and the perceived stress scale to 500 participants. Then I used natural language processing software to extract numerical data from participants' writing, then feeding the data into a machine learning algorithm to create a predictive model. Analysis of the predictive model's efficacy revealed that the software was able to predict whether one had chronic stress with 98% accuracy. Hence, my research study created a predictive tool that could be self-administered and does not require extensive experience, unlike current predictive means.
Hello, my name is Sohi Patel. Flame retardants are currently one of the 6 most toxic chemicals worldwide. Polyurethane foam, a common residential construction material, is highly flammable, and therefore is typically embedded with toxic, brominated flame retardant chemicals that are extremely harmful towards both humans and the environment. In order to solve this momentous issue, I developed and tested a novel organic flame retardant solution based around the chemical derived from the byproducts of buckwheat, a common plant. The phosphorus triethyl ester of methyl 3,5-dihydroxybenzoate was synthesized primarily through both a Fischer esterification and a modified ferrous preparation of arylyl dialkylphosphonates, and was then employed in 500 samples of open-cell flexible polyurethane foam at varying additive concentrations. The specific heat capacities of each sample in joules over grams per degree Celsius were found and calculated through isobaric calorimetry. Both an omnibus one-way ANOVA test and a Fisher's least significant difference post-hoc test were performed, both of which further substantiated my results, suggesting that higher concentrations of my flame retardant led to higher specific heat capacities at an extremely high significance, with a p-value of less than 0.00001. Additionally, I performed multiple cost analyses and pricing comparisons, which evidenced that both the materials and the synthesis procedures for my novel flame retardant were cheaper and more accessible than the industrial bromination procedures currently being used. The phosphorus triethyl ester of methyl 3,5-dihydroxybenzoate is proposed chiefly as an insulator, with strong prospects in both flame retardancy and heat resistance. As an additive in open-cell flexible polyurethane foam, the developed chemical possesses adequate flame retardant characteristics and therefore could be used in a large variety of applications, as one of the world's most promising environmentally friendly plant-derived flame retardant solutions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Derek and I'm from Houston, Texas. During the coronavirus pandemic, some of the news has been actually focused on the stock market and how volatile it is. That's actually kind of relevant to the project that I was working on, which consists of 2 parts. The first one was analyzing various machine learning algorithms across 4 different experiments to determine which ones can do the best investing, known as value investing. And the second part was modifying an algorithm, but I'll get to that later. So in the first part, I experimented with multiple machine learning algorithms and found that the random forest algorithm was able to get the highest returns while making sure it has relatively smaller volatility. Now, in the second part of my project, I modified the fundamental way that a machine learning algorithm works. That algorithm is called k-nearest neighbors. So when it performs its calculations, it uses various dimensions and determines the similarity between different points. So my modification was to add a weight to each of these dimensions so that the calculations prioritize more important dimensions and reduce the importance of other ones. And I could then compare this machine learning algorithm with the original one and found that it was able to improve the performance by between 3 to 4% on average. So, in terms of societal impact, there are two big contributions. The first is I was able to create an algorithm that's able to get long-term high returns while minimizing volatility, and that's useful for applications such as saving for retirement or college tuition. And the second one is that I was able to modify the way that an algorithm works so that perhaps researchers or scientists can then take that improved algorithm to solve their own data problems and be able to get higher performances. Thank you.
Diabetic retinopathy and glaucoma are eye diseases that affect a very large population of the world. And often used to diagnose these are very expensive technologies, which are inaccessible in developing regions. And when diagnosed early, these diseases pose little threat. But as time passes without any contact with the doctor, the threat of permanent blindness and death skyrockets.
There are three primary solutions to the problem mentioned above. The first are live medical professionals. However, many of the people who need access to this technology live in remote areas and cannot access them. The second is WebMD. However, enough said, it's WebMD. And the third are phone attachments, which sends images to physicians. However, many of these require access to a doctor and a solid internet connection.
So before we started making the actual product, we decided to conduct a survey. So as depicted on the slide, this is a preference of feature survey, which essentially strives to ask the future users which features they would appreciate most, and those are the features that we strive to embed within our system.
There are three primary engineering goals for this task. The first is a variable focus liquid lens phone attachment, which adjusts focus based on voltage. The second is a mobile phone application, which encompasses user preferences as an interface that can be easily managed. And the third is a neural network model trained for 3 stages to achieve accuracy rates above 95%.
When developing the diagnostic algorithm, it was important to take into account what the algorithm could look at as a basis for diagnosis of either disease. On the left, we have glaucoma, which has some characteristic features such as the CD, or cup to disc ratio. And on the right, we have diabetic retinopathy, which is often diagnosed from images through the development of exudates or fatty buildups, as well as some aneurysms of the vasculature.
So our device is composed of a variety of sensors and circuitry, but the biggest attraction to the device is definitely the lens itself. And what makes this lens special is that instead of normal glass, it actually has a liquid called polydimethylsiloxane, as well as water. And when a electric field is applied across this liquid mixture, it actually bends in the shape of a normal lens, which creates a lens effect. And this is very important as this lets us customize the focal length of the lens.
We designed the physical components of this year's project with the software AutoCAD. On the left, you can see the various phases of development that this project went through. On the top, you have many clunky moving parts, which is the old phase. And in the new phase of development, we have replaced these moving parts with a variable focus liquid lens, like discussed on the previous slide. On the right, you can see the Arduino circuitry and a real-life image of what the device looks like this year.
The phone application has 3 major parts. The first is a user interface platform, which allows you to encrypt user data and access it. The second is a place to upload the images to diagnose your result using machine learning and send it to your doctor. And the third is a place to get treatment plans based on your result and the doctor's feedback.
So the heart of the back end of our system of Panoculus is definitely the algorithmic implementation through which we made our neural network. And essentially what this neural network is made of is from the Inception V3 model created by Google, which is like a framework for CNN, which we then customize it to our need and trained our neural network, which is now embedded into our iOS app.
During the course of its development, the neural network went through several development stages, consisting of different training setup and different hyperparameters. On the left graph, you can see that over the course of hyperparameter optimization, the reported percent accuracy of the diagnosis of each disease went up. And on the right graph, you can see the mean squared error of the binary classification for the stage 3 of development. As the neural network was exposed to more images over the course of 50 training epochs, you can see that the mean squared error fell drastically.
When put head-to-head against the world's leading medical professionals, Panoculus came out ahead. It was ahead on average 14% against the world standard on detecting these diseases by current doctor. This was further proven by the right graph and the confidence interval. This ensured that the results were not due to chance and statistically significant.
So after creating our product and testing it, we had numerical data on our hands to the accuracy. And what we decided to do with this was run a couple of Z tests, one for each of the diseases that we were diagnosing. And so what we found was that our results showed that our device was upwards of 10% more accurate than the conventional methods of detection, which proves our hypothesis of the more efficient way of diagnosing with neural networks.
As shown by the device comparison chart, Panopticus leads commercial phone attachments and clinical diagnosis in all areas. The key place you should be looking at is cost. It costs $8 compared to the $375 of the other two. This, in combination with its rank accuracy as number one, makes it the forefront for leading change in this type of area and technology.
Hey there, my name is Michael Gerhardt, and for my project this year, I was tackling the problem of crop diseases. So crop diseases cause between 20 to 40% of global crop yield to be lost on a yearly basis. And this is a very big problem because it perpetuates existing food security problems and makes it harder for people around the world to be well fed. So how do farmers address this? Well, in the developed world, the solution is to consult plant pathologists, experts that can identify these diseases, and then the farmer can help them and fix them. However, in the developing world, these plant pathologists are too expensive, and as such, a single disease can wreak havoc on plots in the developing world, specifically these smallholder farms that comprise a larger proportion of crop yield in the developing world. And so the solution to this, in my eyes, was to create something that could be used by both the developed and the developing world. And so the purpose of my project was to create a smartphone application that could take an image of a plant leaf and then accurately diagnose it with a plant disease. And so how I did this was I used machine learning. I took a data set of 54,000 images, and these images were of plant leaves, and they were split into 14 crop diseases with 14 crop species with 26 diseases. And so I trained a model that, given a picture of a leaf, it could identify and classify it with a disease as diseased or healthy. And so after I trained this model, it was evaluated to have an accuracy of 99.51%. And this is an accuracy on images that it wasn't trained on. And so once I had this, I deployed it onto a smartphone application. And this application had the ability that a user could take a picture of a plant leaf, run it through the app, and then it would diagnose it as diseased or healthy. And additionally, the app had information about management techniques that started with the most sustainable, but then eventually it showed all the techniques, so the farmer could know the accurate way to deal with it. And so the application, I verified it. I went to local garden centers and botanical gardens to test it, to verify it worked on real-world plants. And so what this project essentially is it allows for the democratization of access for an accurate means for farmers to detect crop diseases. But importantly, it allows them to detect them early, allowing them to stop outbreaks and protect their crop yield.
Hello, my name is Priya Chattery, and my project was about cardiovascular and neurological diseases. And so cardiovascular and neurological diseases make up the majority of the world's current health crisis. But right now, there's not really a set solution or proactive system that can address these issues such as cardiac arrest, strokes, and stuff like that. And so, therefore, for my project, I created two wearable sensors which would continuously monitor the user's EEG and ECG signals. And they were constructed by using printed circuit boards, so they were built by custom design through KiCad software, and included microcontrollers, analog to digital converters, and a BLE module system. And so, in addition to the sensors, two machine learning systems were implemented to analyze these biosignals in real time. So the machine learning processes were separated for the heart signals and for the neural signals. And so the heart signal analysis involved first the ECG denoising stage, then feature extraction, a support vector machine, and a convolutional neural network. Now the support vector machine would basically identify if the beat was abnormal or normal, and the convolutional neural network would classify what type of abnormality the beat was. And based on this information, if continued abnormality type beats occurred in a specific pattern, a heart attack could be predicted before it happened. Now, the overall machine learning model maintained an accuracy of 93.7% in binary prediction and a 98.3% accuracy in predicting the type of abnormality or categorical classification. And most importantly, the system predicted heart attacks 23 minutes before they occurred. As for the second machine learning algorithm, two different SVM models were implemented to predict epileptic seizures and look for signs for Alzheimer's disease for early detection. So the prediction model had an accuracy of 96.7%, meaning that in 96.7% of the cases, the model could detect an epileptic seizure before it happened. And as for the Alzheimer's background detection system, that had an accuracy of 91.6%, meaning that any early detection of Alzheimer's was accurate 91.6% of the time when compared to future diagnoses of the patients. Overall, the system worked in conjunction as a sensor, a mobile app system, and an algorithm to basically function as a single unit with which the user can feel safe and comfortable in their daily life without having to worry about things like cardiac arrests and epileptic seizures in certain cases, so that they have a sense of security that isn't there previously. Right now, you call an ambulance and you have to wait until the ambulance can come save you, and you risk your life. With this system, it creates a proactive system where the risk is almost negated, because cardiac arrest can be counteracted before you even have any heart issues. That you can be in a hospital bed before you even experience any symptoms. And that's the main impact of this entire project.
Hello, I'm Kumi Selva, a senior at Clear Lake High School. My project was on using polydimethylsiloxane microlens enhanced flexible gallium arsenide solar cells to increase the driving range of electric automobiles. Most electric cars have a driving range less than 150 miles. It takes several hours to fully charge an electric car, and charging stations are limited between cities, so there is a market for new technologies to increase the driving range at a low cost. Conventional silicon solar cells are not powerful enough or flexible enough to fit rooftops of electric cars to extend the driving range. On the other hand, gallium arsenide solar cells are twice as efficient as silicon, but they are mainly used in space applications because it's too expensive. Half the cost of the gallium arsenide solar cell module is the cost of the wafer on which it's made. Last year, at the University of Houston Energy Devices Fabrication Laboratory, I worked to make gallium arsenide solar cells on inexpensive metal tapes. The metal tape is about 1,400 times less expensive than the wafer. The flexible gallium arsenide can also be made into continuous lengths by roll-to-roll processing. My calculations show that the power from these flexible gallium arsenide solar cells was still not sufficient to increase the driving range. Light concentration is one way to increase the power output from a solar cell. The optics for light concentration has to be very simple, low cost, and flexible for automobile rooftops. I found that a silicone named PDMS is all of those. The gallium arsenide can be made into microcells, and PDMS can be made into microlenses. Each microlens will concentrate light onto one microcell. I found that the power output of the flexible gallium arsenide microcells can be increased 10 to 12 times using the PDMS microlens. The angle of light incidence of sunlight on automobiles will change throughout the day, so I tested the power output from solar cells at different angles of light incidence. I measured the tilt angle of a sample holder using the gyroscope on my phone. I tested my flexible gallium arsenide solar cell with the PDMS microlens at different angles of light incidence ranging from 0 degrees to 60 degrees. I found that the power output of the solar cell with the PDMS microlens decreased to less than 20% in power output, even at a 45-degree angle of light incidence at one sun. I tested the same solar cell without PDMS at different angles of light incidence at 1 sun and at 10 suns using a conventional light concentrator. The power output using the PDMS was 7 to 8 times higher even at the higher angles of light incidence at 1 sun. Anti-reflective coating, or ARC, is used to improve the solar cell performance. I want to find out how ARC affects the power output of the solar cell with the PDMS at different angles of light incidence. First, I found that the power output of the flexible gallium arsenide solar cell increased by 50% after applying the ARC. I found that the power output of the solar cell with PDMS was 9 to 10 times higher even at higher angles of light incidence at 1 sun after ARC as compared to 7 to 8 times before ARC. So ARC makes the functionality of the PDMS microlens even better. If flexible solar cells enhanced by PDMS are used for roof and hood tops of electric cars, simple calculations show that the driving range of electric cars can be increased by as much as 25%. Lastly, combining the clean energy technologies of solar energy and electric cars will promote sustainable technology which will help fight climate change.
Hi, my name is Kabir Jolly, and my project is about using machine learning to detect skin cancer and Parkinsonian tremor. So skin cancer and Parkinson's disease are some of the most serious non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, in the world. Early detection and treatment allow Parkinson's patients to mitigate complications and drastically improve their quality of life. And for skin cancer, early detection and treatment can reduce the chance of death by 96% for lesions that are in their later stages. Because you need expensive equipment and the oversight of trained professionals to operate that equipment, the screening process for both of these conditions is inaccessible to millions of people. The goal of my project was to develop an end-to-end platform that uses these machine learning models to detect a multitude of diseases, and starting with skin lesions and Parkinsonian tremor. For skin cancer, I made classifications using image preprocessing, feature extraction, and transfer learning on the Inception v3 neural network. The model was trained on 18,000 images from an annotated dataset, free, open source, available online, and that ensured its validity over a wide range of conditions. Additionally, I 3D printed a lens attachment that can be housed on a smartphone in order to take the close-up images of the skin lesion and put them into the model for classification. For Parkinsonian tremor, I used pictures of Archimedes spirals drawn by patients by feeding in image data that was quantified using a histogram of oriented gradients feature descriptor fed into a random forest classifier to achieve high levels of accuracy for the skin cancer with the deep learning based approach, and the tremor using a machine learning based approach that was comparable to that of a doctor in a clinical setting. Furthermore, I created a glove that used a micro electromechanical accelerometer to detect signs of Parkinsonian tremor versus other potential causes such as essential tremor or dystonic tremor, as it records the frequency and that allows it to differentiate it from other causes. The applications of this project are twofold. First, it presents a novel way to detect skin cancer and tremor early on, and second, it can be scaled to other NCDs that currently account for around 70% of the deaths worldwide.
Hello, my name is Ian Pedrosa, and this is my science fair project. So, basically, musculoskeletal injuries or disorders are little injuries to the muscles, tendons, or ligaments, and they're incredibly common. Over 100 million Americans suffer from them every year, and it leads to over $200 billion in damages, either from annual care, lost wages, or just the treatment itself. And the crazy part is that the majority of the money in damages isn't even coming from the initial treatment. It's coming from afterwards, because most people aren't getting the proper treatment they need. Only 10% of sufferers actually started to undergo treatment, and of those, only 35% actually finished their treatment. So what you have is a bunch of people who simply don't have the time or resources to heal correctly, and that means that they're getting only further complications down the road. So for my project, I attempted to build a system that could allow physical therapy treatment both remotely and in an economically efficient manner. So to do this, I created a kinematic tracking system that consisted of accelerometers and gyroscopes attached to each limb of the body. And for the first part of my project, I used these sensors to create 3D models of the limb's motion in real time, and I was able to do this accurately and effectively. And for the second part of my project, I developed machine learning algorithms that could take in input from the accelerometer and gyroscope data, and from that distinguish if someone was performing a key physical therapy exercise correctly or incorrectly. For example, I did this with a back squat, and I could determine whether someone was doing it correctly, or if they were putting their knees too far forward, or if they were putting their back too far forward, or if they weren't going low enough. So I actually have a couple demonstrations of this, and I'm going to play them for you with some really cool music behind it. So yeah, that is my project, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emma Johnson, and my project is called A Novel Way to Prevent Scaling in Saltwater Through Reverse Osmosis on the Moon. In 2024, NASA is planning to send the first woman and the next man to the moon. Now, water is a vital resource for habitation in space as well as here on Earth. Through my research conducted, I found out that there is one crater on the moon known as Shackleton Crater that is the only crater on the moon that is able to hold ice. This is because it is located on the south pole of the moon and the sun rays do not directly hit it. My question for my project was, would the application of graphene oxide and media, which is a chemical base used in a laboratory, to a commercial semi-permeable membrane reduce the scaling by 50%? During my experimentation, I had 3 different types of membranes. The first one was a standard commercial semi-permeable membrane. The second one I used was the standard commercial membrane coated with the GO media. My final membrane is called ESPA2 GO PA. Now this stands for the standard semi-permeable membrane as well as the GO media with a layer of a polyacrylic acid. After my data was collected, the research showed that the membrane with the GO as well as the polyacrylic acid was able to decrease the scaling by 90%, which exceeded my hypothesis and question. This also allowed the membrane to have a lower anti-biofouling property. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenna Jackson, and this is my project testing intrafracture motion with different techniques of immobilization used during brain radiotherapy. The purpose of this project is to find a more cost-effective and cheap and comfortable way of immobilizing than what is used today. Brain cancer is the 10th leading worldwide cause of death for both men and women. And the most common treatment, brain radiotherapy, requires the patient to be completely immobilized to keep the healthy tissue safe. The popular device to do this is the immobilization device, the thermoplastic mask. However, this mask can be very uncomfortable for the patients to wear and expensive. It can cost up to $5,000 to make, and a patient will need up to 2 to 3 of these because of weight loss, a symptom of radiation therapy. So this could be a $15,000 investment for the patient. To see if there was a more cost-effective and comfortable way of immobilizing, I tested using the CRAD surface imaging system, 7 participants using the thermoplastic mask, tape immobilization, the vacuum bag, and no immobilization. They were tested for 5 minutes to see how much movement they would make from the isocenter, the center of the face. As well, at minute 1 and minute 2, they were asked to move their head to the left and to the right to see how much the device can restrict the movement. Overall, the thermoplastic mask did the best of restricting the movement side to side, from left to right. However, statistically, the thermoplastic mask and the tape immobilization was able to restrict the same amount of movement. As well, to further the study, I asked the participants to complete a comfortability survey that asked on a scale of 0 to 10 how comfortable they were with pain, panic, and irritation that they felt from the device during the project. The most complaints came back for the immobilization device because of how they panicked and feared, as well as how much it irritated them. So overall, I was able to conclude that the tape immobilization was more cost-effective and comfortable than the thermoplastic mask. As well, it can restrict the same amount of movement. The only issue with this is that the thermoplastic mask takes the less setup time, because once you have it made, you just have to put the patient on a table, place the mask on, and they're in the same exact position for each treatment. However, with the tape, you cannot do this. So I'm continuing this study to create a device we use alongside tape to place the patient in the same exact position for each treatment, so that it could be cost-effective as well as comfortable, as well as time efficient.
Hi, my name is Jameson Combe, and my project is based on the effects of mechanical and chemical soil stabilizers on slope erosion. This is an extension project to my previous year's research, which tested the effects of geotextiles and vegetation on slope erosion. My overall goal was to determine the most effective way to prevent the damage done by fast running water down hills in construction sites and landscaping scenarios. My hypothesis was that mechanical soil stabilizers would be more effective at preventing the damage done by running water on slopes than chemical soil stabilizers. The way that I tested this was building 7 identical boxes that were all 2 feet by 4 feet and setting them all at a 20-degree angle to create the same slope. I then applied a different method of soil stabilization to each box. The mechanical stabilization techniques that I tested were rubber mulch, fiber rolls, and terracing. The chemical methods that I tested were lime, calcium chloride, and cement. After placing all of the techniques into the boxes, I then used a hose with a sprinkler end on it to simulate rainfall. I stood 5 feet away from each of the boxes, and I applied 1 inch of rain to each box, aiming it kind of at the base of the box so that it would fall down and run down the slope. I measured that I was meeting 1 inch of rain using a rain gauge that I placed at the top of the box. After the rain gauge showed that I had applied 1 inch of rain, I left the boxes for 2 minutes for the water runoff and soil runoff to be collected in a tin pan at the end of the box. I separated and measured the soil and water runoff by straining the water through a coffee filter so that the soil was collected separately and the water could be measured separately as well. The water was measured in milliliters, and after leaving the coffee filters to dry, I weighed the soil in grams so that I could compare the amount of runoff. I completed this for 2 rounds, each with 3 separate trials. My first round consisted of 3 consecutive days to simulate heavier rainfall, and my second round was completed with 1 day in between each time that I ran the project to simulate less heavy rainfall. After comparing all of my collected data, I was able to determine that overall mechanical processes were the most effective way to prevent slope erosion. However, comparing my data to my previous year's research, I was able to determine that geotextile fabrics were actually the most effective way out of everything that I have tested at preventing slope erosion. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm very excited to work at HMNS this summer. Bye!
Hello everyone, this is my project and it's about what type of music helps a person to concentrate the most. I came up with this idea from a YouTube video that shows different sound waves can affect water's formation. So I was thinking if sound can affect us too, since humans are made up mostly by water, approximately 60%. I designed this project in order to test how music can affect us from one perspective, which is about our concentration levels. And this project can also apply to many uses, such as setting up a playlist scientifically in different situations, thus increasing the productivity and efficiency of work. I designed an experiment and did some online research to test my hypothesis, which states that classical music helps people to concentrate the most. First, I designed an experiment which tested different people's speed, which showed by time used per puzzle on Sudoku puzzles under different types of music environments. In detail, I tested a total of 19 people, and I let each of them do 7 different but similar level Sudoku puzzles under 7 situations, including without music, with classical music, with jazz, with K-pop, etc. The Sudoku puzzle that each person did under the same music situation was the same. The result of the experiment was that 11 out of 19 people, which was a majority, had the fastest speed under classical music, and also the average speed of classical music was the shortest. There were some exceptions, but most of them had a specific reason, such as some of the participants got used to one type of music when doing work, some of them don't know how to do Sudoku puzzles before, etc. Overall, the majority, which is 11 out of 19 people, did the best when they were listening to classical music, thus testing the hypothesis that classical music helps people to concentrate the most when they're working. For online research, I found that higher concentration level is due to the reason that classical music is peaceful and harmonious, which creates a calm and serene study environments. Also, Mozart and Beethoven are the most common type of music that is thought of to help the brain focus because of its rhythm, transition, and no words. First, rhythm is important factor because music with a smooth and peaceful rhythm usually helps people to calm down and focus. Second, transition is an important factor because Stanford University School of Medicine has found that when music stops, listeners tend to focus, so when there is no sound between music, the brain picks. The stopping of the music activates the ventral frontal temporal network, and the second network activated is the dorsal frontal parietal. When those two are working, the brain is in high attention. Third, words are one of the important factors because music without words helps the brain focus. Words just distract the brain from the activity that it's trying to accomplish. Overall, according to the data that I've collected in the experience and some supportive evidence from the internet, people concentrate the most while they're listening to classical music, which tested my hypothesis that classical music will help a person to concentrate the most. Thank you.
Hello, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for this amazing opportunity. I'm super excited and I can't wait to start. But anyways, my name is Emerald St. Laurent and my project is Not So Fun in the Sun, the impact of zinc oxide and titanium dioxide on dinoflagellate. Dinoflagellate are microorganisms that glow due to agitation. So coral and zooxanthal have a symbiotic relationship, which means they both benefit. Zooxanthal are a specific type of dinoflagellate, so since coral and zooxanthal are so hard to grow, I decided to use dinoflagellates because they're an indicator species and reflect the state of the environment by glowing. Sunscreen has been linked to coral bleaching, and this is because of the active ingredient oxybenzone. Scientists have tried to combat this by thinking of alternatives such as zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. However, since it is still fairly new research, we aren't exactly sure what the actual impact of these two alternatives is. So in my project, I'm trying to depict which one is, quote, safer. First, I had to put the dinoflagellates on a circadian rhythm, which is 12 hours of brightness and 12 hours of darkness. This is because they're photosynthetic, which means they get their energy from the sun. Once I got that, I began to do my trials. So I used my spectrophotometer, which was provided by my school, to record the percent absorbance, which actually showed me how many dinoflagellate are actually in the individual tubes. And then, in order to record my bioluminescence, I used a scale of 1 to 10, which I created because the amount of light produced is such a small amount, I couldn't actually use a light meter to record the amount of bioluminescence. Then I made the 4 different dilutions that are shown on the slide and added 1 drop of each to the different groups of vials. I did this on the 7th day and continued to record my bioluminescence and absorbance. As you can see on day 7, when the dilutions were added, there was an immediate decrease in bioluminescence in the zinc oxide group. However, the titanium dioxide actually went up at first before slowly decreasing, and this is because I think it might have given the dinoflagellate nutrients it needed, but it didn't have enough for them to continue growing. However, I think if I would have continued adding a drop every day, I would have continued to see the growth of the dinoflagellate. Based off the readings I got for their absorbance, I also saw a decrease in the dinoflagellate's growth and health. However, it wasn't as steep or dramatic as the bioluminescence showed, because with the bioluminescence, it showed immediate decrease in dinoflagellate. It is important that I had both my absorbance readings and my bioluminescence, because had I only had the absorbance, I would have thought that it didn't have as big of an impact on the dinoflagellates as it actually did, and that was shown in the bioluminescence. Overall, my original hypothesis was mostly confirmed because both did cause a negative impact on the dinoflagellate. However, I was unaware that the zinc oxide would cause such a detrimental impact.
My project is Earthquakes versus Soil. My problem is, how does soil composition dampen the movement of longitudinal waves created by earthquakes? I wanted to vary the amplitude and frequency to mimic the differences in earthquake strengths, and varied the distance from the source to mimic the distances from the focus of the earthquake. My hypothesis was, if rocky soil, silty soil, sandy soil, dirt, and clay are exposed to longitudinal waves of different amplitudes and frequencies, then clay will be best suited to dampen the waves. I chose clay because I thought that it would be more dense than all of the other soils. My materials were soil for in-ground use, which I used as my clay because it contains clay and would be a more realistic use. Topsoil, which was my control, rocky soil, sand, an aquarium, a decibel meter, a computer which created the desired frequencies, a speaker, hearing protection, gloves, and a face mask. The amplitudes I used were 80, 85, 90, 95, and 100 decibels, and the frequencies I used were 100, 150, 200, 250, and 300 hertz. To do the project, I put the speaker at one end of the aquarium and put in the soil. I set the frequency and amplitude that I was using and moved the decibel meter 7 centimeters away from the speaker. I took that reading and four more distances, each going 7 centimeters up from the last. Then I changed the amplitude but kept the frequency the same. After I had gotten all the readings from all of the amplitudes, I changed the frequency. After I'd taken all the readings for that soil, I changed the soil, and I created the silty soil by mixing equal parts of the topsoil and rocky soil. My conclusion was that my hypothesis was not supported. For the amplitudes of 80, 85, and 90 decibels, for all of the frequencies but 300 Hz, sand dampened the waves the best, but for 300 Hz, clay dampened them the best. For the amplitudes of 95 and 100 decibels, for all of the frequencies, silt dampened the waves the best. Some things that could have affected the readings could be reflections of the waves off the back of the tank, that the soil could have been packed down at certain points, making it more dense, and outside noises also could have impacted the readings. This benefits society by informing people which soils are the least impacted by earthquakes so they can build safer buildings on them. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Sandhya Mahesh. I'm a freshman in high school. And this project that I've been working on for the past few months is called Using Artificial Intelligence for Asset Performance Management. So this was done specifically with industrial plants in mind. So most use time-based maintenance, where maintenance is done based on a planned schedule. But this can cause a few issues. It can waste money and resources because maintenance is done much earlier or later than it needs to be. So finding a way to move from a time-based to a condition-based strategy where maintenance is done based on the condition of an instrument can allow companies to lower their maintenance costs, improve the efficiency of their plants, and increase the safety of their personnel. The purpose of this project was to develop artificial intelligence algorithms using the 4 input variables of vibration, motor power, pressure, and temperature of industrial equipment to predict when they will need maintenance. So to obtain this data, I used a dataset from the University of California, Irvine's machine learning repository, and all data I collected was from a cooling filtration circuit on a hydraulic test rig. So there were multiple sensors that were used in different locations that measured different units like temperature or vibration or motor power. And the data also simulated different faults like abrasion or a bad electrical connection. Before analyzing the data, it had to be prepared. So the data was loaded into R, a computing language that was used for statistical analysis, and headings for different data sections were added for better understanding of the data in the future. So the dataset was split into the control and test sections. The control was used for creating models, and the test was used to test and measure the accuracy of the models. So when the models were built, input variables of vibration, pressure, temperature, and motor power were used, and the output variable was cooler condition. Using the data from the control dataset, we created models of 1, 2, 3, and 4 variables, and then we applied the models onto our test dataset to check their accuracy. We tried to find the best model with as many controls as possible, such as the type of model, the amount of data used, the data set that was used, and the software used to build the models. So we determined the accuracy using statistical metrics like root mean square error, coefficients of determination, and the mean absolute error. So it was found that the model with 4 variables was the best model. Unfortunately, many companies don't have the resources to have sensors for all 4 different variables. So the model that used only 1, temperature, had been a good option when factoring in financial constraints. In this project, I was able to develop AI models that predicted the performance of a specific component, and nonetheless, this principle can be applied to several different fields of healthcare, agriculture, even on a household scale. So thank you so much for listening. I'm so lucky to be presenting in the company of so many talented people.
Hello, my name is Alan Makoso, and my project is about lunar constant altitude descent maneuver and thrust-to-weight ratio. Yields to low thrust-to-weight ratio, and it's going to be really imprecise in lunar landings. So this is why in this project I'm going to examine how thrust to weight ratio affects landing on the moon. And then some background information. So before any spacecraft land on the moon, they must be in a 15 km circular orbit. And then the first thing they do is to deorbit. So in here, you see the thrust vector is perpendicular to the weight vector. And then this will cause the orbit to become suborbital. And then during the descent, you'll have to make sure that the altitude does not change so that in this case, it's going to be safer and it wouldn't run into anything on the moon because the moon's terrain is uneven. And then during the direct descent phase, it's basically just you have to burn at a specific location so that the velocity is zero when the position is zero. And the reason for this maneuver is that this maneuver is safe, precise, and simple. And thrust to weight ratio is again the ratio between thrust and weight. So the expected outcome is that I expect a nonlinear relationship. And then, so first I'll have to see during each phase as described, I'll have to see the relationship between thrust to weight ratio distance. And during the constant altitude, I'll have to see what this angle must be. So after that, using the information, you can calculate a lot of the properties, but the problem is you have all of that is assuming that the acceleration is constant. So therefore, in a constant acceleration, you have to use this. You have to vary the mass flow rate so that the acceleration of the spacecraft should always be constant. And that's because as you burn a fuel, the mass becomes lighter. So if you decrease the rate you burn fuel proportional to the mass, then the spacecraft acceleration would be constant. So using the information in Microsoft Excel, I've computed equations to describe how to land during each phase. And using those information, I have created a program in JGrasp, or the programming language Java, that accepts user input, output, calculates the equation, and computes that given certain parameters, you will know the information during each phase of the descent. So in conclusion, this is again a lot of the engines, they have high efficiency and low thrust, and then I'll have to see how this low thrust and low thrust to weight ratio can be used during low lunar landings.
Analysis of grass alternatives for lawns. Greetings, I'm Audra Asari, a senior from the Academy of Science and Technology. The modern grass lawn is a cultural holdover from the 17th century European aristocracy. Today, it is a symbol of a clean neighborhood and an area for pets and children to play. However, the traditional grass lawn lacks biodiversity and has some adverse effects on the environment. In my experiment, I compared 3 ground covers: grass, creeping thyme, clover, and mixed clusters of each, grown from seed, and examined them daily for a period of 21 days. Starting on day 12, I didn't water the plants for 5 days to simulate a drought period and monitored their withering during this period. At the end of the growing period, I performed chemical tests to measure the macronutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium, as well as the pH for the soil for each sample. Now to the results. The clover germinated first, with the grass soon to follow. However, creeping thyme took a couple more days to germinate. In clusters with clover and creeping thyme, the clover quickly dominated the growing space. In clusters with grass and creeping thyme, the grass was much taller than the thyme, which could cause mowing complications since thyme does not need to be mowed. During the simulated drought period of the experiment, the amount of withering was compared. The grass and grass with creeping thyme mixture experienced some of the most withering of the viable clusters. The grass and the clover mixtures did the best consistently. For the creeping thyme, one of the samples experienced the most withering out of any cluster, and the other experienced the least withering. To eliminate variation like this, more samples would need to be tested in the future. Each macronutrient has different purpose for the plants. Nitrogen aids the photosynthesis process by being a major component of chlorophyll. Potassium regulates opening and closing of the stomata for CO2 uptake and triggers the activation enzymes for producing ATP, which is used to store energy. Phosphorus is used in energy transfer and synthesis, as well as the breakdown of carbohydrates. The clover samples were expected to have the highest nitrogen levels, since clover is a legume that fixes nitrogen into the soil, but this was not the case. But I'm sure what you really want to know is what we learned from all this. Which plants makes the best ground cover? Grass had the highest growth rate. Its sturdiness and some of its macronutrients were improved when mixed with clover. Clover established itself the fastest. It initially showed hope of being more drought resistant, but then began to wilt more a couple days into the drought period. Thyme grew the slowest and wouldn't require mowing, but it also had an inconsistent response to the drought and wasn't very compatible when mixed with other plants. Based on solely the results of this experiment, the grass and clover mixture were the most successful ground cover. In the future, testing could be done with larger sample sizes and much longer growing period. Additionally, other factors could be tested, such as the plant's response to foot traffic or dog feces, in order to make the analysis more comprehensive. Thank you for your time.
I came up with this experiment after observing a rotting piece of okra in my backyard and a snail crawling on it. At first, I thought that there was a relationship between okra and snails. However, after researching, I couldn't come up with anything that was showing a direct correlation. Instead, I saw that there was a lot of information about snails and fungus. Eventually, I wanted to see more about how I could kind of manipulate and use household fungal deterrents, snails, and vegetables to see what I could make of that. My leading question in this experiment was to see how well household fungi killers deter earthworms from feeding and defecating on plants. As you can see, it says earthworms here, and previously I said that I wanted to do this about snails, and I ended up doing it about both. I started off with earthworms because it was easier to find them, and I had to order the snails from a scientific website. My hypothesis was that the tea tree oil, I had 3 household fungi, antifungal products that I found after researching, and I said that tea tree oil would be the most effective product because I know that they are really good for repelling fungus from your skin and your hair and your nails. In addition to the tea tree oil, the other fungal deterrents that I used were hydrogen peroxide and baking soda. To do this experiment, I separated the earthworms and the snails into environments and habitats. I placed mushrooms to act as the food into each habitat, and I left the earthworms and the snails with the mushrooms, which were covered in the household fungal deterrents, for about 36 hours. And I observed them to see, and I wanted to see which household deterrent would result in the least amount of defecation in the environment. My hypothesis was supported by my experiment. My hypothesis stated that the tea tree oil would be the most successful and efficient household product, and while it did work by repelling the snails and earthworms, the tea tree oil and the baking soda were very strong in concentration. And I know that it was strong because it resulted in some of the earthworms and snails dying. And that is definitely not what I wanted because the earthworms and snails are very valuable decomposers in our ecosystems, and if they were taken out, that would be really bad. So instead, next time I definitely want to use concentrations of each and balance it with something like water so that it's not as potent and yet it is still able to repel the snails and earthworms. As a further extension of my project, I'd like to test the antifungal household products on plants, so different concentrations of the tea tree oil and baking soda, just to see how it would actually react with the plants, because that was my overall goal with my experiment, to find a plant protectant, really, and keep it away from fungus. And so I want to know if these, even in the lower concentrations, if it would still be too potent and affect the fruits that come from the plants. Here are some photos showing how I set up the different environments. Here are some more photos from my experimentation with the mushrooms and the snails.
Hi, my name is Mariana Rodriguez.
And my name is Rebecca Lorente, and our project tests the efficiency of different methods of microplastic fiber filtration utilizing new 3D printed and centrifugal-based designs. Our project's aim is to test models that we created ourselves, or prototypes that we created ourselves, against current models that are available right now on the market. We hypothesized that the models we created ourselves would do better than the models available right now.
To give you some background knowledge, microplastic fiber pollution is whenever fibers from materials such as nylon, polyester, and acrylic end up in our ocean. This disrupts our marine ecosystems because lower-level niche organisms die off due to malnutrition because of overconsumption of these microplastic fibers. For our project, we tested two types of microplastic fiber filters, one being internal and the other being external. Internal filters are filters that you toss into the washing machine and they collect microplastic fibers as they toss and turn with the clothes. The external filters are the ones that filter the water that carries the microplastic fibers outside the washing machine.
Okay, so for our internal and external models, we had the commercialized version of the lint lover for the external model, and we created our own model, which is this one, utilizes centrifugal force. We had an original model and then we improved upon that. With this one, we did the same for the internal models, and the commercialized version being the Cora ball, which is this, and we had this that uses polylactic acid, 3D printed, and we improved upon that in terms of material and structure, come up with this one, this model. When analyzing data, we found that the lint lover performed best filtering out polyester microplastic fibers, while the prototype R.2 did best when filtering out the acrylic microplastic fibers. Overall, all the filters had a better time filtering out polyester microplastic fibers, while the exception was Coraball, which did better filtering out acrylic and performed worse overall.
With the highest percent efficiency being 11% with polyester using the lint lover, we can see that microplastic fiber filtration has a long way to go. We also see that microplastic fiber pollution doesn't have a lot of publicity. This is because we have seen the prices of the lint lover, which currently retails at $140, and the Cora ball retails at $45. This is due to the products being aimed towards very specific consumers and not the general public because of the lack of knowledge. However, we were able to calculate what our product would retail at, and we found that prototype R.2 would retail at $14 and M.2 would retail at $10. Again, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. We really enjoyed doing this project.